Welcome to the Empowered Living Zone, where you can create the life you crave. With me, Dr. A, as a psychologist for over 30 years, a transformational life coach, and an expert in self-empowerment, my life's work has been inspired by the beautifully powerful resilience of the human spirit. We will share stories and successes of people who have not only overcome personal adversity, but have used their traumas and hardships courageously as a springboard into greatness. Create positive transformational shifts on your way to achieving phenomenal success. Get ready to level up as you move beyond the challenging terrain of your life's journey into the empowered living zone. Ignited by spirit, fueled by purpose, and guided by vision, the Empowered Living Zone show starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. A, and you are listening to the Empowered Living Zone on Transformation Talk Radio. My guest today is Dr. Pat Baselli. Dr. Pat is an international award-winning talk radio host, the founder of the Transformation Network and Transformation Talk Radio, and the CEO and owner of Unlimited Possibilities Now, a successful inspirational company. Dr. Pat is well respected in her various roles in the human potential field, and she has received numerous awards for her empowering radio messages. I'm grateful and honored to have Dr. Pat join me today. Welcome, Dr. Pat.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you today about so many things, but I think you're going to touch upon something that is now making the headlines. Believe it or not, it's not making the headlines like we think it is. But what you're about to take on today is at the very core of what's happening in the world of our mental and psychological and emotional, let's just call them being, those parts of ourselves. But you're going to talk about it today in a very interesting and fun way, aren't you?
Yes. And it's intentional to make light of it because I think we need to make light of the thing that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to start off with a little confession, Dr. Pat. I don't know if it's really a confession, but it might be a confession. A few weeks ago, I went to my local AMC theater to watch the new release of Pixar's Inside Out. And what's funny about there's no children to use as an excuse for a grown adult like myself to watch an animated children's movie. I don't even like animated movies. And so the question is, why would I do such a thing? There's really a reason to this. So 10 years ago, Inside Out 1 was released, and I took my son to see it. And it was interesting because as a psychologist, I got really excited about this. And why was it that I got excited about this is it's the first time, it's kind of like when I got excited when Oprah started talking about spirituality. It was like, oh my goodness, Oprah is talking about spirituality. It is now mainstream. This was one of those experiences. It's like, oh my goodness, we have a children's film that is talking about just the natural, normal human experience of navigating emotions. You know, I really appreciated how Pixar took a stab at normalizing this human experience, making it less of a taboo to talk about the struggles as we navigate a very normal human experience, and that is all of our emotions. And so because I was so impressed with the first Inside Out, when I learned about its sequel, I had to go see it because I was really curious about what it was going to do in terms of addressing much more complex emotional struggles that we all share as human beings. And this has a lot to do with failure and rejection and how we navigate these things. And so for those of you who may not remember Inside Out, it introduced us to the emotions, the very basic emotions of joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust inside the mind of a young girl named Riley. We saw how these emotions helped Riley navigate her world and at times caused her a lot of internal turmoil. Now, Inside Out 2 picks up a few years later with Riley entering high school. We see the return of the favorite emotions, joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust. And these are now joined by some new faces, specifically anxiety, envy, and embarrassment. There are many more, but we'll focus on those three main ones today. Now, the sequel shows how new challenges and more complex emotions create more inner turmoil and often lead to Riley's feelings of not good enough. So the movie follows Riley as she deals with academic pressures, ups and downs of friendships, and her quest to understand herself. Each of these experiences is colored by her emotions, which try to take control of her and try to protect her. And one pivotal scene shows Riley failing a big exam, leading to a spiral of self-doubt and feelings of not being good enough. In her mind, we see her emotions arguing and trying to take control, with anxiety and envy often clashing with joy and sadness. The climax occurs when Riley becomes overwhelmed by her emotions following academic setbacks and social rejections. And this overwhelm leads to struggles with feeling like she's not enough. In the end, Riley learns to accept all of her emotions, finds a way to balance them, and this leads to a greater sense of self-acceptance, self-worth, and resilience. So that's the backdrop of today's story, Dr. Pat.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's the whole idea. Let's talk about the words upside down. And so these are fascinating words because we're now seeing them show up in multiple types of, let's just call it contemporary types of films, right? Or TV series. Now, this one in particular, so people love the visuals. Did you like the visuals in the movie?
Yes.
Right, right,
I loved him.
right. Because that's part of it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's watching the journey, but it's also watching the visual representation of upside down, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And, people have seen the trailer, they've seen the movie. So often we watch trailers and we make a decision. Am I going to go see it or not? Right? It's either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. We found that with other movies. We found a couple of really fascinating disappointments in the blockbuster Hollywood world. One of them was Furiosa, especially after the breakthrough Charlize Theron remake of a character that was very little talked about in the Mad Max series. But also, we're taking a look at worlds upside down, right? What's the other most popular, ridiculously, I think the highest money making, I think it's Netflix phenomenon? Stranger Things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think Netflix, if you don't get on it and don't wait till 2026 to really bring us the finale, you're going to be okay. Because by then people will forget what the phenomenon was about. But what is our fascination with both looking at our external environment upside down and our internal being upside down? What do you make of that when you see a film like that for yourself?
It's a great question, Dr. Pat. You know what I think I get excited about when I see films like this is that what it's doing is it's putting out literally on the big screen. It's putting out on the big screen, what it's like to be a human being. And what I love about this, and I'm gonna speak from personal experience,
Yeah.
Dr. Pat, that when we are alone with these experiences, all these things that are going on in our head, and I'm not even going to say necessarily floating, because floating makes it sound serene. It's not serene. Sometimes there can be a battle up there. I think the fact that it's on the big screen, what it does, it does a couple of things. One, it's for entertainment purposes, right? And so what it does is it makes this less serious. That's one thing. And I think that's important. Sometimes I think we take our experiences as humans way too seriously. This is supposed to be fun. And sometimes we get away from that experience or that realization that this is supposed to be fun and enjoyable. So that's one thing. I think the second thing is when we see it in front of us in the big screen, it makes us realize that we're not the only ones having this experience, that this is what everybody's doing, and it makes us feel less crazy. It makes us feel less broken. And I think these are really important. It also just it opens the door to having discussions, light discussions about what it means to be a human being,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, isn't this one of these movies? Let's talk about this for a minute because let's take a journey. This is one of these movies where characters are described as emotions, right? What is Amy? Amy Poehler is what I forget which one Amy is. I
It's
don't know
both.
if Amy is anger or whatever Amy is, but but you have each character: anger, sadness, disgust, fear, right? You have these interesting things that show up, right? But then when you knit them all together, what are we really talking about here? We're talking about a representation of ourselves as humans as we grow, as we change, right? And, I wanted to say to all of you that may be listening to this, go ahead and review whatever you want to review about the movie. That's not what we're talking about now. We're talking about Pixar and the way to take what's going on in our society in so many different ways right now and put them into a perspective that most people can understand, even younger people. Would you say that's true of this movie?
Absolutely. I think what's really interesting is, I started off today's podcast with making a confession because this is supposedly a children's film, right? And
Supposedly.
yeah, my feeling is that anybody not only can enjoy it, but can really benefit from its message. And what I liked in particular, and you kind of got to this a little bit, Dr. Pat, is these were characters. These aren't just experiences. I mean, you saw visuals, you felt the energy of them, you felt you were in the mindset of each of those. So they were really fleshed out. And it almost felt like, and I think this is our experience internally. It's almost like you have a family up in your head, and families fight. Sometimes they come together and they work out really well and they accomplish great things. And sometimes there's lots of conflict and it creates a lot of angst and turmoil. And I think that's what we see in this movie, Inside Out, too.
Yeah. And this is on the heels of the latest report that has come out post-pandemic. Remember, I said to you, I think it was in one of the shows, I can't remember which one, we were talking, and I said to you, here's what 2020 was about. Here's what 2021 was about. Right. And I went through a little scenario. Here's 2021. We're all reaching to survive, whether you're a small business, what can we get our hands on to really hold on to something we don't know the end of? Then 2022 comes, right? And we get a moment of reprieve where we think, are we done yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And we go through 2022. But the burden of those years, just to really put this in perspective, the burden of those years, what people carried through those years, we went into 2023 almost like an upside down one or an upside down two movie. I don't care what movie. Yeah, honestly, it felt more like Stranger Things to me. Okay. Felt like the beast is coming out of the underworld. But we come out in 2023 and we're not sure of what we can trust. So, in the analogy of the movie, what are some of the things we're feeling? We're feeling those, let's call it those five primary emotions. But you said something interesting about Upside Down 2. And Upside Down 2 gives you a different set, brings things new. But here's the fascination. We're so fascinated by Upside Down. We're so fascinated by the multiverse. We're so fascinated by the Spider-Verse or Spideyverse. We're into something new here that is pulling us forward to look at multiverses in different ways. And the question is, are we being pulled to look at them in different ways, or have we always known that they exist and now we're fulfilling a soul's call? But this particular movie in particular really goes to another level, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it does.
Yeah. What do you think
Yeah.
that level is, Dr. Pat?
I think they really dig deep on emotions we don't talk about, like envy,
Hmm.
right? I think they really hit a couple of core things, right? The some of the properties are bigger than each individual property of the movie. The sum of each character, the sum of each sense of self is so much bigger, right? When you step back and when you look at what this movie is presenting. Look, this is from a Hollywood perspective, when you do a sequel to anything, hello, you're in the risk zone.
Yes.
We are not all Steven Spielberg or James Cameron. We're not all of us are like those two, right? But even so, even in James Cameron's sequel to Avatar, it was met with a lot of confusion and a lot of angst, right? Because it presented more depth. I think Inside Out 2 was a message to Pixar and many other people. You can't rest on your laurels. And I want to ask you this question. Do you think that it brings out enough information for multi-generations to understand what we might be going through here on planet Earth? But they do it in a fun way, right? I was laughed out on laughed at. I can't even say it. But I was laughed at a bunch of years ago when I started a project, and I got the permission from the Exploding Kittens people who created that game. Now apparently that thing's a movie. But I went back to them and I said, "Do you mind if I use this brand? I want to create an educational game called Exploding Ticks." These guys made 10, 20 million in fundraising for Exploding Kittens the game. Like, why do we love to see exploding kittens? I don't know. But I was so bent on educating people about Lyme disease. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. But I went back to them and they thought, yeah, I mean, if you could create the characters, we'll support you, we'll help you, and so forth. But when I entered the Lyme disease world and I said, this is what I'm doing, it's kind of like this movie. Some people don't want you to deal with real life issues in a cartoon way. And other people are like, oh my gosh, we need to learn this in whatever way possible. Do you find that when you went through these and you were experiencing the movie, that you could feel the things that these characters felt?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I commend Pixar. And it's funny, you said, sequels, there's always a risk, right? There's always a risk. And I will tell you, at least my experience was that the second was as great as
Yeah.
great a quality as the first. And I loved how well it tackled the complexity, because
Yeah.
what was interesting is you see young Riley in Inside Out 1, and the emotional experience is very primitive and primal because she's young and she doesn't have the cognitive capacity to have more complex experience. And then she gets into high school, and I think Pixar does a great job of showing, demonstrating in great detail, like I said, the energy of it, the character of
Yeah.
it, mindset, the language, of each of these emotional experiences. I think
Oh,
Pixar did a wonderful job at it.
I'll tell you, we're going to talk about this too when we come back from break. But did you identify? So I identified. So here, help me out. You're a world-renowned psychologist person, okay? But even with everything I know, here's the transference. In psychology they call it transference. Here we go. I'm pretty much okay until that moment where Riley experiences something in life I experienced. A big bleeping exam. Right?
Right.
Look at the brilliance of picking something like that to prove a point.
Mm-hmm.
The big exam, the big one. Now, I think if you watch the movie, unless you were snoozing or eating too much popcorn or something, or you're me who had this personal experience, what happens with Riley and the big exam here, Dr. A? Failure.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody that watched this, please email us or call into the show 1-800-930-2819. If you didn't have either a hot flash PTSD or something like that, because I am not made to take an 8-hour GRE. I just can't. It's hard. I tried. And I think I stared at the paper. I think I wrote my name right. I think they gave me credit for writing my name right. And it was looked at as such the biggest thing. I was not going to, this is what I was told. I was not going to get into university for my doctorate if I did not get something, some score. I don't even remember. Couldn't do it. My brain doesn't work like that. Now, if you'd have interviewed me and asked me those questions, I guarantee you I would have gotten a great score. But I blank papered it. Have you ever, Dr. A, had something so important and you knew it was important and you're failing? And I'm just going to use it as a metaphor, the big exam. That could be the job. The job is a big exam. That could be raising your children. Oh my God, I'm failing the raising your children exam right here. OMG. Oh, wait, let me give you one better. The relationship exam. I am on the verge of failing the relationship exam because this is what we tell ourselves. What was your sense of that and what that led to in the movie?
I think it's a great question. And as I hear you talking about this,
Did you get a
Doc,
hot flash?
yeah, well, I, there's a great appreciation about this, and I was saying this movie is intended for everybody. What I just thought about as you were talking, it's like, this is the world of an adolescent. This is the world, and for the adolescent, it's all about pure acceptance and school and doing well in school. Yet in reality, is if we look at that and we look at the quote adult version of that, we never get away from it. There is always, in quotes, the exam where we're failing some test. And so what I'm struck by is I'm not, I understand that there may be more complexity with it as we get older and more wise, yet it's the same thing. The fear of failure, failing whatever test, whatever standard that we are holding ourselves to. And then the second thing that's right up next to it is the fear of rejection. That doesn't go away however old we are, that doesn't go away. And so it creates that inner turmoil around the emotions as we navigate this. So whether we're 15 or 80, we are still struggling with that, navigating around those very common human experiences of failing some test and being fearful of being rejected from our
Yeah.
people. Yeah.
Do you know what I love about this that nobody's really talking about?
What's that?
Riley took the test. See, we get so scared, we don't even go take the test. Now, I'm using it metaphorically. Okay, if you watch the movie, you know exactly what we're talking about here. But let's just use it as a metaphor. There is an exam that we feel we're going to be judged on something, whether it's the interview, the job, the promotion we get or don't get, network we're creating. It doesn't matter. You doing a show. There's always this thing sometimes that lurks for some people, not everybody. And there are reasons that it doesn't for some people, but there's always something lurking. Here's the thing I want everybody to remember. You have to be in the game to take the shot. Once you're in the game, you have to be Caitlin Clark and take the damn shot.
Mhm.
Whether or not you think you're going to make it from the three-point line, or it doesn't matter. Whether you made it to the Olympics or you didn't. Whether your friends love you or your other teammates push you around or you don't. You have to be in the game to take the shot. Simone Biles is a perfect example of this. Coming back, rocking it, crushing it, right? Knowing the blowback she's going to get. All of this. But what is it that I'd love you to talk about? And let's use the movie. How do we get from those moments where we didn't crush the exam to back to feeling good about ourselves? You see, what is it that some people have? What is it that a Simone Biles had to really help her? And clearly she will tell you when you interview her, the God of my understanding, those are my words, and my therapist every week. But there is a way back, and we're going to talk about that on this show. I think, for lack of a better, people are going to email me on this, but I use the word failing. But I want to say this out loud. What is it about that experience that can make us stronger? And Dr. A, help us walk through how we get there when we come back, would you? Because there's there's two sides to the coin. There's fail, succeed. There's fear, there's trust. Take us through that, would you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we are going to take a quick break, and we come back, we will talk about those things. Thank you. We'll be right back. We are back on the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, and Dr. Pat. Before we dive into this a little bit more deeply, if you would like to inquire about the opportunity to work with me, or you would like to learn more about empowered living and transformational life coaching, you can reach me through my website at www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. Again, that's www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. All right, Dr. Pat. So let's dig into this a little bit more deeply. I want to start where we left off, and that is, really recognizing the value of this movie from the perspective of, it really gets into some very common human experiences that we struggle with. And what I like about it is that it's public, it's out on the big screen. These are things that each and every one of us deals with. It's part of our development, it's part of our makeup. And it's really less about the fact that we're having the experience. So, when I say the experience, what experience am I talking about? I'm talking about the inner turmoil that can be created by our emotional world in reaction to events that we experience in the outer world. That's one, first and foremost. And then the second one is what does it create inside of us when we struggle? And I think a natural byproduct of struggling is the fear of inadequacy, the fear of I am not enough. When we experience struggle and turmoil, we believe falsely, we believe that that turmoil or inner struggle is an indication that somehow we're not cutting it. Somehow we're just not enough. We're not up to par. And what I like about the movie in particular is not only does it normalize these experiences, but what it does is it takes us through Riley's own resolution around this and her own growth around this. And what did it really come down to? One is the movie shows us it's really not about these feelings that we're having, and it's more about what we do with the feelings, because the feelings are normal, they're natural, and everybody has them. And it's really, what do we end up doing with it? Do we collapse into it, and do we accept what we call the truth around whatever our emotions are showing us? Or do we look at that as an opportunity for growth and learning? And I think what Pixar shows us in Inside Out is that Riley accepted the challenge of leaning into the experience and growing from it and learning from it. And I think that was a really important and very powerful message of this movie. And I don't know if you would like to add to that,
Yeah,
Doctor.
yeah, I want to add to it because the movie is a representation of what so many people have gone through. I alluded to the fact earlier today that the numbers are out. So what the heck do I mean when I say the numbers are out? I'm talking about now we've had enough time pass, Dr. A, and you know this, you're on the top and the leading edge of this. We have to, those of us that have degrees in psychology, whether we are clinical or not, I'm a cognitive behavioral. That's what I chose as my pathway. Clinical psychology wasn't for me. The minute I found out I couldn't in Washington State say the word spirituality in a session, I'm like, I'm out. But in the end, when you go down your path of life, you're here to help people. That's what the network's about. But the curious thing about the movie is it really speaks to where we are in our day and age. Why do I say that? The numbers are out. We're looking at the degree of anxiety and depression coming out of the pandemic. What are we not getting enough information about? People Riley's age. See, it's almost as if we've gone through these 4 years, and yes, it was 4+, and we've forgotten the children. In the same way, we went through 27, 28, 29, although we did start the network then on demand from our audience. We had the largest audience on the planet on AM FM radio at that time. So we launched the network. But we're not talking about the Rileys now. However, this movie does. It really gets to what's going on right now, but it doesn't always get to an in-depth solution. And I would like you to talk about that. You know, two things for me. I have a meditation every day, and I wake up and I say, God, Spirit, Universe, what's mine to do today? Some days the answer, well, most days it's more, but every once in a while I'll get an answer. And about 2 years ago, I got the answer, you need to relaunch Unstuckable. See, I made that word up. Unstuckable is it's a brand. Unstuckable.com is the website. And I was told to do that. Now, I'm not doing it as fast as some people would like me to do it, but we get caught in that. And what I want you to really talk about is how you in your work and the Empowered Living Zone deals with this every day, deals with not enoughness every day from people of all ages. And what have you found to help them? How are you helping them, Dr. A?
Great question. And, you know, I will say you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. I would say that this is at the core of a lot of struggles that I see with clients. And you know, I'm going to put myself in that box. I'm just as human as anybody else, Dr. Pat. And I will tell you that my biggest struggles are around the fear of not good enough. And it's interesting to see how our emotional life actually fuels that struggle. And so there's something about the richness of our emotional experience. And like I said, it's complex. It's conflicting. Sometimes we can feel very conflicting emotional experiences at the same time, and it can be really overwhelming. And I believe that it actually fuels these experiences of not enoughness, as I would say.
Mhm.
And you know, when you look, you know, I think Inside Out does a great job at this resolution. You know, when you watch the, you know, the crescendo, and you watch the building up of Riley's struggles, and you see it hit a critical point. And it's really interesting because you know, even at the critical point in this movie is when Joy, you know, basically says, I can't protect Riley from this. I can't protect her from the not good enough stuff. And as a matter of fact, not only can I not protect her from these feelings and lots of other yucky feelings, but I'm actually doing a disservice by doing that.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
that is the pivotal moment in the movie where what you see Riley shift into acceptance.
yeah, yeah,
And what I see as a big struggle in the work that I do with my clients, and again, like I said, I'll put myself in this box as well. You know, on the other side of the not enoughness is this intense resistance and judgment around emotional experience. And when we think about where we are, when we think about our, you know, how do we define or evaluate what we're feeling, most of the time there's an emotion at the center of it. And what I'm struck by is how often in human experience, and this is what I see with my clients, how often they make their emotional experience wrong. They judge it, they resist it, they make themselves broken and bad because they're feeling a particular feeling. And what we see in Inside Out that I think is just remarkable and wise is the resolution is when Riley recognizes that everything she feels, good and bad, hard and easy, you know, difficult emotions, easy emotions, all of them serve a purpose. All of them are
yeah,
important in guiding her in her life. And so a critical moment in this movie is when she goes into that place of acceptance. And I think that is so important. And I'm sure the listeners may be getting tired of me hearing me say this because it's always going into this acceptance. accept the experience, allow it, lean into it. Because when you lean into it and you don't fight it, there's really important
Mhm.
information in there, Dr. Pat. It's our GPS system. It's
Yeah.
letting us know where we are, what territory we're in. And when we lean into it and we accept the opportunity to grow and to learn, then we go into our resilience. We go into not only self-acceptance, but we open up the door to other things. We open the door to self-compassion. We open up the door to self-awareness. And instead of fighting and fueling that fight with resistance, when we go into acceptance, there's a lot of magic that happens in
Mhm.
terms of our own personal power in particular.
Yeah. And let's just talk about the reality of this and how it attracts the world worldwide. Let's just stay with the movie world for a minute. Inside Out 2 is on track for exceeding the other movie that was very, very similar in its meaning and messaging and acceptance, Barbie. And when you think about Inside Out 2 and Barbie and you put them side by side, not by characters, what was the popularity in Barbie? Was it just Barbie, or was it the way they talked about all of the emotions we're talking about now, but through characters? What about acceptance? That was the end of the movie, right? What about empowerment? But Inside Out 2 is on the mark to even exceed that. As a matter of fact, when you think about it, at 57%, meaning distribution, they're at 1.35 billion worldwide. Domestic, foreign is 776,000. Why? You see, it's because of what we're talking about today. I think we're getting at a place in society where we're willing to see the ups and the downs of life. However, we want to know that there's a takeaway. We don't always want, Black Widow to get killed for humanity's purposes. We don't always want that. We want something lasting. But see, this is an interesting place to watch Hollywood go, I find,
Mhm.
right?
Absolutely. And I think what happens is, like I said earlier about Oprah, if you want to get a finger on the pulse of our culture, all you have to do is look at media, and media tells you where we are, right? And, it's interesting. I'm thinking about a couple of things with this, Dr. Pat. I think what's happening is, you know, um, we talk about the crescendo in the movie. I think metaphorically speaking, we're experiencing the crescendo in our culture. We are you're seeing in our culture this buildup, this buildup, whether it's internal or external. Look at what's happening in our world. Look at the current events, and what they're mirroring is this turmoil. It's a mirror of the inner turmoil. We're seeing the outer turmoil.
Mhm.
The question becomes, what will be its resolution? The resolution in the movie is self-acceptance. The resolution in the movie is self-compassion. The resolution in the movie is embracing our experiences and using them to learn and grow. And so what I wonder about is, on a cultural level, are we going to lean into this in the same way that Riley does in the movie? I'm kind of curious what you think about that, Dr.
Well,
Pat.
I'm going to say, if we live in an economic world, I'm going to say that it's much more complicated than box office numbers. There's a reason that Avatar is at the top of the list with almost 3 billion, right? There's a reason for that first Avatar movie to do that. Why? We watched the entire, what you're talking about here in Upside Down 2. We watched an Avatar, but differently. We've watched it in the Avatar characters, even to the point where one of the main male characters was like, I'm going to become one of them. Hello, right? But because I'm not enough the way I am. I'm crippled. I'm not physically well. And what we will go to, or what extent we'll go to even harm others to feel whole, is a very important idea to look at in today's world. But if you look at what we're drawn to, what we're flocking to, we want learning, but we also want a happy ending.
Right, right. Well, and exactly, and all you have to do is look at media and see what's out there, and what it makes me wonder is, if we as individuals and we as a collective are craving, if we're craving, these experiences that we see mirrored in our movie, in the movie
Yeah,
industry. And,
yeah.
are we looking for answers about how to handle our inner turmoil that is created by emotional experiences? Are we
There's no
looking
question.
at a community level even, right?
Yeah, there's absolutely no question. I mean, one of the largest franchises we have now, where I think Hollywood has gotten this wrong again, is the entire Marvel universe. And, everything is about money. So they had to break up the ending between, Infinity War and Endgame. But in Endgame, you saw these individual characters sacrifice for the greater good. There was nothing more gut wrenching to watching that. And people said of Endgame, the emotional roller coaster ride, what they felt, anger, envy, resentment, and they saw it in the characters, right? But when a movie like that kills off some of the most revered and loved characters, people feel it. Why? Because you watch the growth of a Tony Stark and you watch him go from a crazy idiot egomaniac billionaire to somebody in the end who sacrifices himself. You watch the character of Black Widow playing beautifully by Scarlett Johansson. You watch that character go from, we're never going to like her, she's a schmuck. And then what does she do? She throws herself off a cliff to save humanity. You see, this is an introspective look and makes us question our own value system. So many people walked out of there and said, would I have done that? Would I have done that? Would I have done that? That's a level of relating that it's hard to explain. But not every film gets that. Not every television series, not other game you play, not every talk show you watch. The question is, why is this movie Upside Down 2 resonating with so many people? Why do you think that is?
I think it's resonating with so many people because it captures the human experience. And it's interesting. I'm struck by the juxtaposition of this, Dr. Pat, with, you brought up the pandemic at the very
Yeah,
beginning. It's
yeah,
like, isn't it interesting that as we've come out of that a lot of the material we're seeing, a lot of the things that we're seeing on social media, in movies, things that are being discussed on podcasts, have a lot to do with internal experience. It's like, I think this is the first time in human history that we're having these conversations. We're having these conversations of what it means to be human. And we're talking about things that used to be taboo. I mean, we never talked about emotions. We never talked about struggles. We never talked about not good enough stuff. We never allowed ourselves to be vulnerable and transparent and open. And it's interesting that this has come following the pandemic. There was something about the pandemic. Was it incubation? What was it that opened the doors to these very, very transparent, vulnerable conversations about human experience?
yeah. Look, I mean, we're referencing movies in Hollywood for a very good reason because so above, what above, so below, so inside, so outside, so upside down, downside up. And we're referencing something in our pop culture world because there is a reflective moment on these. There's a flip side of things too. And sometimes I think Hollywood misses the boat. And Zoe Saldana said this better than anybody when they asked her about Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Now, that is a movie that so many people waited for and were so disappointed about, and it showed in the box office. But why? Not because of the characters, but because of the ending. And when Saldana gut-wrenchingly says something like, they didn't create the ending people wanted. I wish they would have been together, and I wish they would have not separated the two romantic relationships. What does that tell you that we're longing for? There are some people that refused to even go to see the movie once they found that that was the ending. They didn't care. They were like, I am not going. I don't care what the movie is about. Love the movie, blah, blah, blah. But that's the ending? No way. I'm not sitting for 3 hours to find out that that's the ending. And they begged Hollywood, just like they did in the Will Smith I Am Legend, which they're going to do a remake. They begged them for a different ending. Why? So what they did when you bought that movie, they gave you a separate ending, which keeps the guy alive. You see, we don't want a piece of the pie. We want to go through what you just shared about this movie, but we want something to hold on to in our consciousness that's either hope, perspective, or positivity. I want you to take it away from here because those things, regardless of what you watch, I don't care what movie you're watching, it's really hard to hold on to it without that piece of hope, especially post pandemic. What do you think?
Great. It's a great perspective, Dr. Pat. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I mean, like even in this movie, Inside Out, it's that's the ending, right? What is the message? The message is, well, if Riley can do this, I can do this. And I think that's what's really important is we need that reassurance. We need, and I think that's part of why we are so drawn to common human experience and stories because it's like, oh, I see myself in that experience. And when I see myself in that experience and I see a positive outcome, then I trust that I can have that outcome as well. And I think that that's really important, is that we're always looking for that. We're craving that. We're craving information. We're craving the message that we're going to be okay, that we will be okay.
And
Yeah.
that's really what we're talking about today. There empowerment is a tapestry. That's what it really is to me. And certainly when you create the Empowered Living Zone, that is discussing and coaching about the tapestry of what we want to weave for ourselves in life. And what I love about tapestry is if you've ever tried to create anything like that, I'm not very good at it, but if you've ever tried to create it and you hit a mistake point, and believe me, I am not a weaver, I am awful at it, but I attended a workshops, right? And I made a mistake, a fatal mistake in this weave. And I was asked, do you want to do it over? You should really do it over. And I looked at them and I said, no, there's got to be another option. I don't want to do it over. Maybe it wasn't, this is me now. What if it wasn't a mistake? What if I'm supposed to create something different? Isn't that what we're really talking about today?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Is leaning into the experience, leaning into the experience. What is the opportunity? And I think that's what the movie gives us. You're talking about hope. Hope on the other side of that coin is opportunity. What is here for me? I think a lot of times when we're confronted with experiences that lead us to feel inadequate or not enough or a sense of failure or a sense of rejection, it's a fork in the road. Do we lean into the devastation of that and accepting it as the outcome, or do we lean into the possibility of what it presents to us? And I think that that's what we love about movies is when it leans into opportunity, when it leans into the hope side of the equation. It gives us the fuel, to keep going on our own paths. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for doing this today. Thank you so much for bringing this up because what you're talking about is something we don't talk about in empowered living or empowerment, and you do. And that's the possibility perspective. See, we want to live in a world of probabilities. We want to throw the dice and think maybe I'll get a 7 or an 11. But when we're talking about empowerment, we're not talking about probabilities. We're talking about the possibility perspective. And I think that is so important in the message you do. Thank you for being the coach you are. Thank you for doing this series because we need more of this. Seriously do.
Thank you. Well, and before we end today, Dr. If listeners are curious about empowered living, transformational life coaching, or would like the opportunity to work with me, they can contact me through my website at www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. Again, www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. Stay tuned for the next podcast of the Empowered Living Zone. Join us every first and third Tuesdays of every month at 12 p.m. Pacific and 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the Empowered Living Zone show with me, Dr. A, to create the life you crave. Tune in on the first and third Tuesdays at noon Pacific Time on transformationtalkradio.com and get ready for another show. Say yes to creating positive and empowering change in your life and move beyond life's challenging terrain into the zone of success. Be ignited by spirit, fueled by purpose, and guided by vision in the Empowered Living Zone. For more information on how to do deep transformational work with me and to create the life you crave, visit empoweredlivingcoaching.com. That's empoweredlivingcoaching.com. See you next time.